Warriors, Dawn of the Clans, Thunder Rising, by Erin Hunter. Chapter 6. This can't be happening. Not to my brother. Greywing stared disbelievingly as the ground sank into a hollow and soil closed up the entrance to the tunnel. Jagged Peak! He yelled. His heart was pounding with fear as he flung himself at the mound of earth where the opening had been and began digging frantically. Thunder was beside him, loose soil spraying everywhere as his paws scraped with all their strength. But the earth was too soft. As quickly as they tried to dig out a hole, the loose dirt collapsed in on itself. His fear mounting, Greywing realized they were making very little headway. How much more time do we have? Greywing had only gone down a rabbit burrow once, when Wind was showing him how she hunted. He remembered how uncomfortable he had been, close to panic, and his heart broke for Jagged Peak. Trapped beneath the weight of earth, he kept on clawing and digging, even while he was fighting despair. Jagged Peak, we're coming, he yelled, hoping the young cat could hear him. There was a scuffling sound behind him, and then Shattered Ice and the other cats were crowding around, all trying to reach the collapsed burrow and dig. Let us help, Jackdaw's cry gasped, shoving in front of Greywing. Greywing found his way blocked, and when he tried to get closer to the tunnel, he was almost knocked off his paws by Rainswift Flower. She was clawing frantically, her paws moving in a blur. Cats were screeching in panic, and even though he realized they were trying to help, Greywing knew they were only making things worse. Time was running out, he thought, picturing Jagged Peak, crushed in the dark, his mouth choked with dirt. Then a cat's voice, Winds, rose up above all the others. Get back, all of you, let us deal with this. When the other cats paused, startled, Gorse and Wind sprang past them, began digging farther up the tunnel, above the place where Jagged Peak had been when it collapsed. We know these tunnels, Gorse explained rapidly as they dug. We'll reach solid ground quicker this way. There's room for one more cat. Jackdaw's cry, you'll do. The rest of you, keep away. Greywing worked his claws impatiently into the moorland grass. It seemed to take forever for the three cats to clear away the soil, but at last he glimpsed a patch of gray fur. Jagged Peak! He gasped, starting forward. Wind raised her tail to halt him. She and Gorse leaned over the hole they had dug and carefully lifted out the limp form of Jagged Peak. His head lolled, and his fur was caked with dirt. Greywing couldn't see him breathing. He's dead, he choked out. I've already lost Clear Sky. I can't lose Jagged Peak too. The mountain cats gathered around sorrowfully as Wind and Gorse laid Jagged Peak gently on the grass. He looked so small and thin, with his pelt plastered to his sides by soil. Greywing remembered how tiny Fluttering Bird had looked in death, and a pang of grief shook him from ears to tail tip. Why do things like this happen, he asked himself. We all came safely through the cold season, Dappled Pelt murmured, her tail drooping. And now Jagged Peak dies like this. It's my fault, Greywing told himself. I left the mountains to protect Jagged Peak. I failed. We can't give up hope, Wind meowed, her tone brisk and bracing. He may not be dead. While she was speaking, she slipped her paws into Jagged Peak's mouth and clawed out some of the dirt. She gave his nose a lick, clearing that too. Greywing waited tensely, then let out a gasp of relief as Jagged Peak started coughing, gagging on the soil, and vomiting some of it up. A heartbeat later, his eyes blinked open, and he rubbed at them feebly. He's okay, Rainswift Flower exclaimed. Oh, Wind, thank you. Wind dipped her head. You're welcome. We owe these rogues so much, Greywing thought. I'm going to talk to Tall Shadow about letting them join us. We'd be crazy not to welcome such generous cats. Wind and Gorse stepped back as the mountain cats gathered around Jagged Peak, using their paws and tongues to clean the dirt off his pelt, and giving him comforting licks around his ears. No need to fuss, Jagged Peak grunted as his strength began to return. He tried to pull away from his den mates and stood up. I'm not a kit. I can groom my own fur. Greywing knew his young brother wasn't trying to be rude and ungrateful. He understood that Jagged Peak was quivering with embarrassment because he hated to seem weak. You shouldn't have been wandering around by yourself, Jackdaw's cry meowed. What if something happened and no cat was there to save you? You're lucky that Thunder and Greywing were nearby. Jagged Peak flinched, and Greywing glared at Jackdaw's cry. Jagged Peak has a brain, he mewed. He would have figured out a way to get away from those dogs if he had to. Jackdaw's Cry opened his jaws to protest, then clearly thought better of it. It's time we went back to the hollow, Graywing meowed roughly. Before any cat could move, Rainbow turned to him. With a sidelong glance at Jagged Peak, she worked harder than any cat to free his brother from the collapsed tunnel. I think Jagged Peak should lead the way back, don't you? She asked. That's mouse-brained, Graywing thought, then a heartbeat later realized how clever Rainbow was being. Taking the lead will give Jagged Peak his dignity back. Good idea, he agreed. Jagged Peak, we all dashed here so quickly we're not sure of the best way back. Can you show us? Jagged Peak struggled to his paws and gave his belt a shake. I guess so, he muttered, as if he was reluctant, though Graywing could see his eyes brighten and his tail begin to rise with pride. Thanks, Rainbow, Graywing murmured into her ear. It's the least I can do, she responded. Jagged Peak began tottering toward the camp, with Rainbow and Shattered Ice springing to support him on either side. As the other mountain cats followed, Graywing flicked his ears at Wind and Gorse, beckoning them over. I thought when the dogs arrived, you went to hide in the undergrowth, he began. How did you end up coming with the others to help save Jagged Peak? Wind and Gorse exchanged a glance. We decided we couldn't just abandon you, Gorse explained. After all, we're good friends now. Wind nodded. So we went to the hollow to see how you were, and got there just as Shattered Ice turned up, out of breath and yowling about Jagged Peak stuck on the moor. Thank you, Graywing meowed from the bottom of his heart. His paws itched to invite the two rogues to join their group, but he knew that he would have to discuss it with Tall Shadow first. Is there anything we can do to show you how grateful we are? If it's possible, we'd like to join you, Wind responded, as if she had followed Graywing's thought. We do all we can to hunt well and help out. That's right, Gorse assured Graywing. Life has gotten much harder since the new cats came to live here, and we need allies. I'll see what I can do, Graywing promised. Racing past the other cats, he headed for the camp where he found Tall Shadow standing at the edge of the hollow. Her ears were pricked alertly, and her gaze swept across the moor, constantly watchful. When Tall Shadow spotted Graywing, she took a few paces forward to meet him. Are all the cats okay? She asked, desperate anxiety in her voice. Thunder and Jagged Peak. Are they safe? Yes. Graywing rested his tail on her shoulder. They're both fine, and the dogs have gone. Tall Shadow let out a long sigh of relief. For the first time Graywing could remember, she sank to the ground as if her legs weren't strong enough to hold her up anymore. Thank goodness, she breathed out. I could never have forgiven myself if... She couldn't go on. They're still alive, Graywing reassured her, thanks to Wind and Gorse. He explained how Thunder and Jagged Peak had hidden in the burrow and how the roof had caved in before Jagged Peak could get out. We were panicking, getting in each other's way, he meowed. When we've all recovered, we might discuss plans in case anything like that happens again. Tall Shadow nodded. Good idea, especially now that we're living in these tunnel dens. But go on, she added. How did you get Jagged Peak out? We didn't, Graywing replied. We owe that to Wind and Gorse. He described to Tall Shadow how Wind cleared the earth from Jagged Peak's mouth and nose after she and Gorse dug him out. And remember that they came to the hollow to help. They could have just looked after their own pelts. We owe these cats, he finished quietly. They want to come and live with us. Tall Shadow looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. They can stay and share the evening with us, she mewed at last. But then they must go. I need time to think, she added. Graywing opened his jaws to protest. Graywing realized that there was no point in arguing. He knew how cautious Tall Shadow was, and letting the rogue stay for just the evening was a huge concession for her. But is she too cautious? He asked himself. For the first time, Graywing noticed that Turtletail had come up to him and was hovering nearby, waiting for him to finish his conversation. That sounds so frightening, she exclaimed as he turned to her. Are you sure you're okay? Every cat is fine, Graywing assured her. Look, they're coming back. The sun was going down, casting red light across the camp. Jackdaw's Cry was outlined against it as he appeared at the top of the hollow. He raced across to Hawkswoop and their kits. As he began to tell his story, Acornfur and Lightning Tail listened with their jaws gaping in shock. A moment later, Jagged Peak padded into camp. Helped by Double Pelt and Rainbow, Shattered Ice followed, escorting Gorse and Wind, and led them down to the bottom of the hollow. Graywing padded up to Jagged Peak, with Turtletail close behind. Come over here, he meowed. You must be tired now. There's a soft patch of moss where you can rest. Jagged Peak pulled away from him. You don't have to look after me all the time, he muttered. I can take care of myself. Graywing twitched his whiskers. Really? Did today prove that? Jagged Peak flinched. Without a word, he staggered off and sat by himself on the moss, his back turned to Graywing, rejecting help even though his whole body was swaying with exhaustion. Graywing's heart twisted to see him so proud and so full of hurt. Stupid, he scolded himself. Rain's flower made him feel better, and now you have to go and put your clumsy gray paw in it. To his relief, Rain's flower followed Jagged Peak and sat down beside him. Graywing saw them talking quietly, their heads close together. Graywing felt a comforting paw on his back. He'll be all right, Turtletail said gently. The rest of the cats had made their way to the bottom of the hollow. Thunder excitedly told the story of how the dogs had chased Jagged Peak. You should have seen Graywing, he meowed. He dashed right up to the big brute and clawed its nose. The dog looked so surprised, but Graywing only did it so the dogs would chase him and Jagged Peak could escape. He was really brave. Graywing wanted to hide behind a rock as he felt the gazes of all the other cats turn to him. Lightning Tail and Acorn Fur looked especially impressed, their eyes wide and shining. That was well done, Tall Shadow pronounced. But don't forget what might have happened. We could have been grieving for dead den mates tonight. Thunder's head drooped. I know, he muttered, looking chastised. Graywing knew that Tall Shadow was right, but he felt sorry for his young kin. Why don't you tell them how brave you were, he asked Thunder, how you stayed with Jagged Peak and hid in the tunnel with him. That was pretty scary, Thunder admitted, beginning to sound cheerful again, especially when the tunnel collapsed. But Wind was brilliant, knowing how to get Jagged Peak out of the den, like she did. Dapplepote rose to her paws. I'd better check on Jagged Peak, she mewed. The last thing he needs is to get sick on top of everything else. Leaving around her den mates, she approached Jagged Peak, who was crouching on the moss with his nose in his paws. Come on, Jagged Peak, she ordered. You have to let me clean up your scratches and scrapes before it gets too dark to see them. For a heartbeat, Graywing thought Jagged Peak would protest. Then he let out a long sigh. Okay, do what you want, he muttered. Graywing watched for a moment as Dapplepote deftly parted Jagged Peak's fur to examine his injuries. I don't think there's anything serious, she mewed at last, settling down beside him and beginning to lick his scratches. But you'll need to let me check again in the morning. Satisfied that Jagged Peak wasn't badly hurt, Graywing signaled for Wind and Gorse to come close. I asked Tall Shadow if you can join us, he murmured. She says you can stay for tonight. After that, you need to leave. She will think about it, he added, as Gorse and Wind exchanged a disappointed glance. She just needs time to come to the right decision and invite you to join us for good. Wind nodded. I can understand that. Yeah, Gorse agreed. It's a big step for her to take. Don't worry, Turtletail murmured, touching Wind's shoulder with her tail. I wasn't sure if I would be invited back, but here I am. Graywing glanced back to see Jackdaw's Cry still telling the story of Jagged Peak's rescue to his den mates. He beckoned them closer with a wave of his tail. You know Jackdaw's Cry, of course, he meowed to Wind and Gorse. Have you met his mate, Hawksloop? And these are their kits, Acorn Fur and Lightning Tail. And I'm Shattered Ice, the White Tom announced, springing up the rear as the whole group padded up to greet the newcomers. Pleased to meet you, Wind responded with a polite tip of her head while Gorse murmured greetings. The two kids crowded up, their eyes shining as they gazed up at Wind and Gorse. Do you really hunt rabbits down their burrows? Acorn Fur asked. Will you teach us how to do it? All in good time, Graywing told her. He was glad to see his own den mates were welcoming the moorland cats, but he had to remind himself that they weren't part of the group yet. Meanwhile, I'm sure Wind will tell you all about it, and maybe you'd like to share some prey, he added to Wind and Gorse. We sure would, Gorse replied, swiping his tongue around his jaws. With the sun sinking below the horizon, the cats gathered together in the middle of the camp, grooming themselves or quietly talking to the newcomers. Graywing was pleased to see how well Gorse and Wind were fitting in, and hoped that Tall Shadow was taking notice. He was glad to see that Turtletail had been accepted and was crouching comfortably beside Rainswept Flower. As Graywing watched, Rainswept Flower got up to break out the rabbit she had caught earlier that day, and Jackdaw's Cry contributed a couple of mice Lightning Tail and Acorn Fur fetched Gray Wing's rabbit, which they had carried back to camp. "So what did you two catch today?" Cloud Spots asked Shattered Ice and Thunder. "You know, when you went off on your own." Gray Wing saw the two cats exchange an embarrassing glance. "I caught a shrew," Thunder replied, "but I had to leave it behind when we heard the dogs." Cloud Spots sniffed, but didn't comment, only glancing around to the others as if he thought his point was made. "And don't you dare do anything so stupid again." Toss Shuttle gave Thunder a severe look. "No young cat should go on the moor alone. You know how dangerous it is." Thunder ducked his head. "Sorry," he meowed. "I'll be sensible in the future. And we need to talk about you leading the dogs right into our camp." Toss Shuttle went on, flicking the same hard glance toward Grey Wing. "Didn't any of you think?" "No, and I'm sorry," Grey Wing replied. "We panicked. And we haven't lived on the moor long enough to know where all the safe places are." Ramsop Flower pointed out defensively. "That's a fair point," Dapplepel murmured. "Maybe we should do more exploring and work out a few escape routes in case this kind of thing happens again." "We'll help with that," Wind meowed eagerly. Tall Shadow gave her a cool nod. "I'll think about it." Greywing guessed that she didn't want to encourage the real cats to get involved with her group. While the prey was being shared, Ramsop Flower tore off a portion of her rabbit and took it to Jagged Peak. "Will you come and join us?" Greywing heard her ask. Jagged Peak shook his head. He bent to sniff the rabbit, hesitated, took a small bite. "Thanks," he muttered. Ramsop Flower didn't try to persuade him anymore, just touched her nose to his ear before leaving him to it. Greywing was reassured that at least he was eating. Greywing took some of the rabbit and went to sit beside Turtletail and Ramsop Flower. At once, Ramsop Flower gave him an amused glance, rose to her paws, and padded off to join Jagged Peak. Greywing blinked as he looked after her. "What's the matter with her?" "I'm so glad you're all right," Turtletail purred as Greywing settled down beside her. "I wanted to come and help you," Metallo said. "I had to think of my kids." "She was right," Greywing responded, pressing his nose into Turtletail's shoulder fur. Twilight fell as the cats shared their stories of the day. Greywing told the others about the meeting with River Ripple beside the river. So much had happened since that it seemed like a long, long time ago. The streaks of scarlet from the vanished sun died away, leaving an indigo sky where stars appeared one by one, glimmering peacefully above the camp. "It's so beautiful here," Greywing thought. "Who would ever imagine the danger we've been through?" Greywing bent his head to eat his share of the rabbit. He realized that Turtletail was watching him with admiring eyes. "It sounds as if you had quite an adventure," she mewed. "Jagged Peak would have died if you hadn't been so quick thinking." "And lucky." Greywing sighed. "We were very lucky," he agreed. Hesitantly, he went on, giving voice to a fear that he had kept secret for so long. "Maybe we were wrong to make our home here on these open moors. We're too exposed. There's nowhere to hide from dogs or anything else that might threaten us. There were dangers in the mountains, but at least we had the shelter of the cave behind the waterfall. We were safe there." Turtle blinked, then flicked her ears in denial. "But where else could you have used your speed to distract the dogs and lead them away?" she asked. "Where else could Thunder and Jagged Peak have found such a good hiding place? Where else could the other cats have come to the rescue so quickly when the tunnel collapsed?" Greywing began to nod slowly. What Turtletail was saying made a lot of sense. "This is the perfect home for us," she went on, brushing her pelt against Tim's. "Look at the kids," she added, flicking her tail tip to point across the hollow to where Acorn Fur and Lightning Tail were stuffing themselves with prey. "They survived. They're strong and healthy, and that proves this is a good place, as long as Clear Sky doesn't spoil it. I can't wait to see my own kids thriving here." The question that had been burning inside Greywing for many moons rose up. "If you're so sure we belong here, Turtletail, why did you leave us to live with two legs?" Turtletail's ears flicked up, and her eyes widened. Clearly she was taken aback. "That had nothing to do with not being sure that the moor was the right place for us," she replied. "Then why?" Greywing persisted. Turtletail shook her head, still unwilling to talk about what had upset her. "This rabbit is delicious," she meowed a heartbeat later, pushing the last scraps over to him. "Much fatter prey than we caught in the mountains." "That's true," Greywing agreed, knowing he had to accept the change of subject. "But what is she keeping from me?" he asked himself, bewildered. He looked up at the wide stretch of stars over the moor. Brilliant in the clear sky, all around him he could hear the comfortable murmur of his den mates, full fed and sleepy. "Turtletail is right," he thought. "This is home now."